When I have fears that I may cease to be, before my pen has gleaned my teeming brain, before high-piled books in charactery hold like rich garners the full ripened grain, when I behold upon the night-starred face huge cloudy symbols of a high romance, and think that I may never live to trace their shadows with the magic hand of chance. And when I feel, fair creature of an hour, that I shall never look upon thee more, never have relish in the fairy power of unreflecting love, then on the shore of the wild world I stand alone and think, till love and fame to nothingness do sink. It seems there is a lot more to talk about in regards to Jane Grey than I thought. I've talked about her history, her on-screen representations, and how there seems to be a curse on any operas written about her. It truly is baffling, that. But now I've come to her definitive moment. Normally, for those who are executed, I would look at their downfall and cover it in great detail. But I sort of already did that in the history video, and her actual execution only appears in a few of her already scarce betrayals. And then it occurred to me, Jane's definitive moment is much more metaphorical. As a historical figure who so famously didn't have a choice in anything, from her husband to being Queen of England, perhaps her definitive moment can be found in one small but significant instance when she made a choice for herself, for better or for worse.
I don't have a choice.
You have a choice. You don't have a good choice, but you have a choice.
Maybe we can find the person underneath all this tragedy. It's difficult to ascertain what Jane really wanted for herself, but I think offering her a Beauty and the Beast style library and a steady supply of tea and cake would have been a start. Tea would not have been a thing for another 100 years, but you know what I mean. I'm mainly focusing on Jane's downfall for this, so I will be focusing on the depictions that include it. Mary tried one last effort to spare Jane from her inevitable fate. If Jane agreed to convert to Catholicism, the Protestants using her would lose motivation and she would be freed. Jane refused the offer, despite knowing it would mean death. The idea of being a martyr is very romantic, especially when you're a teenager thinking you'll be remembered and be an inspiration to others. But it was more than that to Jane. Like Mary, her faith was the only thing she had in her darkest moments. It was the basis for her morals, her integrity. Would she be happy if she abandoned it just to live? Granted, if she had converted and lived, she would most likely have converted back once Elizabeth became queen, but she didn't have the knowledge of what would happen just a few years in the future. At this crossroads, it seemed to her that it was better to die as your authentic self than live a lie. I'm sure we can all sympathise with Jane in this, especially if you hail from a marginalised community, or have been oppressed by someone, even if it's just a bully or a toxic relationship. Sometimes we face a decision that makes us choose between worldly gain and the aspect that defines us. That is the moment where we say, no, you are not taking that away from me. When you have nothing but that part of you, it is more important than anything. Is it so selfish to hang on to your faith, integrity, perseverance, pride or identity in the face of those who want to take it away from you to soothe their own conscience? To quote V for Vendetta, it sells for so little, but it is all we have. It is the very last inch of us. It is small and it is fragile, and it is the only thing in the world that's worth having. We must never lose it or sell it or give it away. We must never let them take it from us. You see this part of Jane staying true to herself. Sometimes she gets that reassurance from other people, like with Guildford and Lady Jane, when they are confident of eternal life together after death. The world they live in is awful and deceitful, so their executions are a mercy. In the Sarah Jane adventures, Rani's assurance that she will be remembered is solidified with Jane thinking that Rani was an angel, sending divine comfort in her darkest moment. So she is no longer afraid for what is to come, as she was earlier on. Hey! Sorry I had to kick you off my lap, but I had to close the windows, otherwise the audio would be covered in... it would be just drowned out by birdsong. We have lots of birds in our garden. And my sister's sending videos of puppies. Why do I need a puppy when I've got a doggish cat? I don't even have to take him for walks. Both Chronicle of Nine and Tudor Rose feature a pre-execution scene between Jane and Mary. Tudor Rose's Mary has her regally inform Jane of what is to happen to her, never breaking her resolve. I should also add that this film does not include the Wyatt Rebellion, and has Jane executed not long after being deposed. As I don't want another copyright claim, I'm going to have to put their conversation into stills.
You wish my death?
I do not wish it. You are young, and I think less guilty than those round you. But though I may feel pity, I can show no mercy.
Your Majesty, for myself I admit my fault. I have done a great wrong against you. But my husband, what has he done?
He is your husband.
At his father's bidding.
Which makes his case the poorer.
He had no choice.
I have no choice. The security of my kingdom demands that he shall die.
Why must you all build your greatness on the graves of others? Why cannot there be triumph without suffering?
Child, you speak out of your ignorance. You forget the verities of government. If I should spare your husband and yourself, there are those who would lead an army on your behalf, and then 2,000 would die in place of 2. Now you understand. You and your husband must die.
Then he will meet his end bravely, as I hope I shall.
Mary leaves solemnly after this conversation, with Jane assuring her she meant no harm. Mary's reaction is introverted, but she has been subject to the malice of her father to take pity despite her reluctance. Jane watches Guildford go to his execution, but turns away so she doesn't have to watch him die. By the time they come for her, she is ready and has nothing left to lose except the memories of happier times. Said memories fly through her mind as she stands on the scaffold and looks to the sky. She assures herself it was a good life. She has no regrets. There is a moment as she's walking to the scaffold that I must have seen ages ago in a forgotten montage about Lady Jane Grey at the start of my Tudor obsession, and accidentally mistaken it for Anne Boleyn. So I've had a Mandela effect for years where I could have sworn there was a moment in one of Anne's execution scenes where she sees the scaffold and for a moment her fear gets her and she turns around wanting to run, but is stopped by one of her ladies and continues onwards. But that was here in Tudor Rose, so now that mystery is finally solved. The preacher on the scaffold recites Psalm 121. I will lift up mine eyes unto the hills from whence cometh my help. My help cometh from the Lord, which made heaven and earth. He will not suffer thy foot to be moved. He that keepeth thee will not slumber. Behold, he that keepeth Israel shall neither slumber nor sleep. The Lord is thy keeper, the Lord is thy shade upon thy right hand. The sun shall not smite thee by day, nor moon by night. The Lord shall preserve thee from all evil. He shall preserve thy soul. The Lord shall preserve thy going out and thy coming in from this time forth, and even for evermore. It's a fitting choice, even if it's not the same psalm that Jane quoted in real life. It is a reassurance of Jane's faith, that she is loved and she will be remembered. It keeps her brave into the last moments. I also have to script out Jane and Mary's conversation in Chronicle of Nine, because I can't share the music or sing along to it. Yeah, guess what? Music was another subject at school I didn't get along with. Mostly down to one teacher. She made me cry in front of the whole class on 3 separate occasions. I hope she gets chronic cystitis. Your Majesty. Aye, Majesty still, through no fault of yours. You are, as I remembered, meek and mild. The serpent's young, 'tis true. I meant you well, Jane Grey. You were wrong to serve me so. What may you mean, your Majesty? Will you pretend you do not know? I speak of your betrayal. If I was traitor to you, it was no wish of mine. I pray you do not tell me once again how you were coerced upon the throne. You said that you believed it. I thank you, cousin, for your pretty words. You have, I see, the ability to make the false sound true. Do not pretend that you are in ignorance of your father's doings. You knew full well that he and your precious uncles have proclaimed you queen again. Proclaim me queen? It is not true. He would not, for he gave me his word. He swore by God he would not. By what God did he so swear? His Protestant turncoat God, that is as false as he? By our own true God he swore it. Then he is forsworn, for he and his brothers rode throughout the countryside, and as Wyatt stirred my cities to rebel, your father swore that Jane Grey was the rightful queen. He promised I should be left in peace. Why should he do such a wicked thing? Believe me." "Yes, I believe you. God pity me, I do. And have believed it from the first. I knew you'd have no part in this late rebellion." "Then why did you accuse me?" "I wanted you to be guilty, Jane, and hoped against hope that I'd see evidence of it in your eyes. Is there not some little measure there? Did you not pray for a Wyatt victory? Come, tell me the truth, Jane. Tell me this truth that I needs must hear. Confess it to me. Confess it to me. Confess it to me. Why are you so silent? What will you have me say? Something. Anything. Anything. So that I may know I have not let you die for nothing. You said, I think, I am to die? Why do you stare at me in such surprise? You were so sentenced. Have you forgotten that?" "I had not forgotten, but I thought—" "You thought I'd be merciful. You were told I meant to free you. All this I know, and it's the truth. Your pardon lay upon my desk, wanting only for my signature. Why do I tell you this? I did not come to torture you, child. I had not meant to let you know how close you were to freedom. You cannot blame me. Put your blame where it belongs, on your foolish father." "I am to die? I've not lived very long." "You cannot believe, I'm sure, that sometimes it is better not to live too long. Better for us who are born to crowns or near them. Such lives cannot be very happy." "When will it be?" "In 2 days' time." "A Sunday and a Monday, and that is all. It is not long. But I think I'm glad of that. I've the time for such farewells as I might pen, but little time for thinking on it overmuch. Jane Grey, admit your guilt." "I am not guilty, your Majesty." "Oh, it is a cruel thing I needs must do. I, who have known so much of cruelty myself, and will they call me a tyrant then? Oh, were it mine to do, Jane, I'd free you, send you far away. But as the state, I cannot. For while you live, your name will be a challenge to traitors and a danger to our throne. I cannot stay longer, little Jane. I'll send my priest to shrive you. Fare you well, Jane Grey. I shall pray for you. Save your prayers, cousin Mary. You've more need for them than I." Mary witnesses Jane's execution in the final scene of the opera. She wants more than anything to sign Jane's pardon, but the Earl of Arundel convinces her not to, lest another rebellion spark. Jane comes off as the more courageous as she bids farewell to the crowd and says, "Into thy hands I commend my spirit, O Lord," and walks off stage to her death, while the chorus echoes her last words. Jane's last inch is her innocence, which she carries even in death. We're led to believe that this is an inch that Mary forsook, believing the deaths of those figureheads would bring peace. We all know that it didn't, and Jane's insistence that she would need prayers more than her could not be more correct. The Streatham Portrait Gallery painting is commonly attributed to Lady Jane Grey, mostly because there are no portraits that would have been painted of the real Jane in her lifetime. If there were, they're likely to have been destroyed, seeing as she was seen as a traitor. Said painting was from the 1590s, but depicts a mid-16th century gown. As a noble, and a close relative of the royal family, Jane would have been entitled to wear everything featured in said portrait, including the gold thread in her sleeves and the gold and pearl jewellery. The high neckline hints towards a modest but mature nature. The portrait is believed to be based on the lost engraving of Jane, and is thought to have been one of many paintings of Protestant martyrs. In 2005, Christopher Foley decided it was a depiction of Jane, albeit poorly executed. However, he said this with the intention of selling the painting to the National Portrait Gallery, where the painting now sits. David Starkey criticised this move. As we all saw with Catherine Howard, anonymous portraits are often attributed to famous members of the Tudor court. Eric Ives put it perfectly. A Tudor teenager who died at the age of 16 is very unlikely to have left much trace on the historical record, and still less if female. Even if an aristocrat, that girl will hardly trouble today's archivists, beyond possible mention of negotiations over putative marriages. For Jane Grey there is a little more, but only a little. However, we have a contemporary description of Jane from the Spanish ambassador, Baptista Spinola, and the cat is climbing up my shoulder right now, from the day she entered the Tower, never to re-emerge. He's making up for all the cat interruptions he didn't make during the rankings video, you see. Yep, here he goes. He's crawling. Ow! Alan, I'm not got anything covering my shoulder. Ow. Claws. Today I saw the Lady Jane Grey walking in a grand procession to the Tower. She is now called Queen, but is not popular, for the hearts of the people are with Mary, the Spanish Queen's daughter. This Jane is very short and thin, but prettily shaped and graceful. She has small features, a well-made nose, the mouth flexible and the lips red. The eyebrows are arched and darker than her hair, which is nearly red. Her eyes are sparkling and reddish-brown in colour. I stood so near her grace that I noticed her colour was good, but freckled. When she smiled, she showed her teeth, which were white and sharp. In all, a gracious and animated figure. She wore a green dress of velvet stamped with gold, with large sleeves. Her headdress was a white coif with many jewels. She walked under a canopy, her mother carrying her long train, and her husband Guildford walking by her, dressed all in white and gold. A very tall and strong boy with light hair, who paid her much attention. The new queen was mounted on very high chopines, to make her look much taller, which were concealed by her robes, as she is very small and short. Many ladies followed with noblemen, but this lady is very heretical and has never heard mass, and some people did not come into the procession for that reason. The French ambassador, Antoine de Noailles, described Jane as wise and good-looking. Sir Thomas Challoner, oh God, I'm going to be pronouncing this guy like he's in a character in Throne of Glass, that's great. Sir Thomas Challoner, let's say, who knew Jane personally, said if he had seen her face, a suitor might have shamelessly burned with passion. And I will just add that this guy would have been 33 when Jane was executed. Yes, you may shiver in discomfort. So Jane appears to be another one of the Tudor figureheads, alongside Mary I and Catherine of Aragon, who was subject to ginger erasure. She appears to have had red hair, like her uncle and two cousins, but is often showed on screen to be dark-haired. So the depiction in the Sarah Jane Adventures was actually the most historically accurate appearance of Lady Jane Grey. Imagine that. As Jane is considered a humble and moderate character, brown hair seems to fit that repertoire. That being said, most of the actresses appear to be keeping their natural hair colour for these roles. In Chronicle of Nine, Jane is clearly wearing a wig, but that's a common thing in theatre, so we'll just let that slide. I'm not totally against wigs or dye jobs for a period drama so long as they look natural. There's nothing like a badly fitting wig to take you out of the authenticity. Pretty much everyone agrees that Jane was forced into this situation by her parents and her father-in-law in order to keep the Catholic Mary off the throne. However, Northumberland underestimated how much the English people hated him. The narrative plays out as Jane insisting to Mary that she was forced into it and begs Mary for her life. Mary, for her part, agrees that Jane was an innocent in all this and spares her in Guildford, but keeps Jane imprisoned because the state of the kingdom is still very shaky and Jane could be used as a figurehead once more. Mary may have decided to release Jane and have her live in the country for the rest of her life. Ooh, thunder. I thought it wasn't going to rain today. Yep, the air definitely smells like there's a thunderstorm a-brewing. But her hand was forced as Wyatt rebelled and Philip II refused to come to England, while Jane and Elizabeth were viable threats. So Jane was executed, as she had already been used as a figurehead before, while Elizabeth was kept in the Tower. But could Jane, who was a devout Protestant and a well-read person, have had some involvement in taking the throne from Mary? That is not to say Jane was in on Northumberland and Edward VI's plans to write Mary and Elizabeth out of the succession, but rather, when she was offered the crown, she was more willing to take it than we are led to believe. Jane's on-screen counterparts sometimes showed Jane's willingness to take the crown out of goodwill. While she didn't want the power, she realises she can use it to make people happier. But the shortness of her reign put an end to this ambition, and Mary carried on the feudalist system of making life as shit as possible for poor people. I feel this is the most you could get away with. Had Northumberland urged her that Mary, a daughter of Spain, a country infamous for their Inquisition, was dangerous, Jane might have felt an urge to spare people from burnings and attempt a more tolerant outlook. As a result, you see in Lady Jane that her good intentions were possibly too good to realistically bring change so quickly. It's a sad idea that good intentions are quashed by the selfish, but that's Lady Jane Grey's story all over. Some of Jane's on-screen counterparts tend to alter Jane and Guildford's marriage into a tragic love story, where, although these two people were forced to be together for the sake of political gain for others, they fell for each other and had a brief span of happiness before Northumberland got in the way. The choice in Lady Jane to have Guildford swear he won't demand to be king was a very deliberate decision, because it would have gone back on his character development. They drop that part altogether in the following scenes as the two of them decide to make their socialist utopia. We know the marriage was not consummated right away, but when they were eventually living together, Guildford's mother kept urging her son not to sleep with Jane. This would have gone against Northumberland's wish for Jane to have a son as soon as possible, to be a legitimate heir to the throne. After Jane was deposed, they were held in separate accommodations in the Tower. Jane was moved to the gentleman jailer's apartments, which would have been considered suitable accommodations for a noblewoman, while Guildford was in the Beauchamp Tower. I've been told I was mispronouncing the name of that tower. This would have prevented any relations that might have led to a child and another figurehead for Protestants to rally around. Jane wrote a letter to Mary where she described herself as a wife who loves her husband, so their feelings for one another may have softened if they were hostile to begin with. To me, her refusing him the title of king consort was her way of drawing a line in the sand between her and the people using her. Her refusal to let Northumberland send Guildford away could thus be interpreted as her wanting to keep her husband on a tight leash, especially if they wanted to secure the succession with an heir. Jane's accommodations would have provided a view of Tower Green. She might have seen Guildford walking to his execution, and later would have seen not only her scaffold waiting for her, but also her husband's body being taken to the chapel for burial. She cried out his name when she saw his body being carried past her window, which could very likely have been done out of love, especially as she came to terms with the reality of her impending demise. Sit down and get your paw out of there. Is that going to crumple every time you wag your tail? I'll just live with that. Furthermore, there are carvings of Jane's name in the Beauchamp Tower. It has the grey crest underneath to show which Jane it refers to. I'm inclined to believe that Guildford was the one who made it. It was common for many prisoners in the Tower of London to leave something etched into the walls to remind future prisoners that they were there, as they would not know how history would remember them. This appears to confirm Guildford and Jane having some form of affection towards one another, as affectionate as two teenagers can be with the threat of death hanging over them. Had Mary allowed them to live, maybe they would have had a successful marriage, but we'll never know. The thing is, the personal stuff like that is hard to get a view of when so few sources exist. When arranged marriages happen such as these, the couple are marrying based on their first impressions of each other. And first impressions are often wrong. Dislike can sometimes turn to friendship and sometimes love in a marriage, but they need time for those feelings to develop, and that's something Jane and Guildford just didn't have. If they had indeed fallen in love, would it have been genuine, or a rush of infatuation cashing in on the shortness of their lives? We don't know because we couldn't read their minds, and we don't know every detail. Portraying Jane and Guildford as doomed lovers humanises them and makes the audience sympathise with them. Anyone who's seen two teenagers argue and bicker know that's a quick way to make your audience turn off them and root for Mary to hurry up and depose them.
Tush, tush, lady. Someone swallowed some very big words.
Fie, fie, sirrah. I wish you would swallow your tongue.
Tush, tush, lady. Well, if you swallowed yours, you would have a pain as well as being a pain, for such a diet would make anyone sick.
Fie, fie, sirrah.
I actually think I may have to kill myself.
I'm not against a love story arc, but maybe in future interpretations we can see more time dedicated to their relationship. Let's take a quick moment to look at the interpretations of the four main figures surrounding Jane. First, her parents, Francis and Henry Grey. For some reason, in my history video script, I kept writing her father's name as Charles Grey, which I luckily caught in on time. Probably because the last Duke of Suffolk was Charles Brandon, and yeah. Frances is typically presented as a strict mother who is more sensible than her husband. She analyses the situation and sees what will benefit her and her family the most. Her affection for Jane is lukewarm at best, and Jane feels more maternal affection from her nurse, Mrs. Ellen. Lady Jane accelerates the beliefs that Frances was physically abusive towards Jane, and somewhat resentful at the fact that she couldn't have a son and has to use her daughter for political advantage instead. However, she knows when to quit after Jane has been deposed, urging her husband just to be happy that they're alive and not join with Wyatt. And that's the extent to which we see Francis Grey. That brings me on to Henry Grey. One thing he is constant on is ambition. His counterpart in Tudor Rose is a little doddery and doesn't realise when people are making fun of him. It's his wife that holds the real sway in the family. Lady Jane portrays Henry as self-centred and indifferent to his daughter's intelligence. He makes fun of Jane's studying until Edward comes in and praises her for her learning. He only shows Jane affection when she is going to make a good match and cares more about what benefits him as opposed to the rest of his family. When he justifies joining with Wyatt by saying, "I owe it to my daughter," a daughter for whom he has cared little for and done even less for, he is really doing it for himself. His self-serving personality is there once again in Becoming Elizabeth, as one of the more annoying characters with one of the biggest potty mouths. His appearance looks very rodenty as well, showing a snivelling coward who buckles at the slightest intimidation. I'd have been very happy to see him executed if there had been a second season. Guildford rarely gets to stand out unless Jane is the main character. Tudor Rose made him a cheerful optimist who fell in love with Jane at first sight, a poor sap who didn't deserve the cruel hand dealt to him. Lady Jane gave him more of a storyline, where he went from a drunken cynic, dancing on top of carts and stumbling out of bars that follow you through the dark and get enough. Then he realises he's been a tactless jerk, and he falls in love with Jane, where he's speechless, over the edge and just breathless. He never thought that he'd catch this love again. His other counterparts, with the exception of the opera, don't get too much of a chance to develop him. In Becoming Elizabeth, he's seen interacting with Robert and his father and Edward, but once again it sucks that there was not a second season because they would have acknowledged his existence a lot more. John Dudley has always been played as the conniving plotter. He is like a mix of Tywin Lannister, Scar and Palpatine. He plans ahead, uses everyone and leaves a lot of corpses in his wake. He is the true embodiment of the evils of ambition, means to an end, for the greater good, that sort of thing. His version in Becoming Elizabeth was a slow reveal, where he cashed in on an opportunity to take power from Somerset when it was presented to him. But did he really lose any sleep when he executed his friend? Doubt it.
Balance is no longer the aim of this council, but support for its king. We are to cease the war in Scotland, reform the church, end dissent. In short, we are to make England great. Again.
Excuse me, I have to go and vomit.
It's raining very heavily right now, so I'm pretty sure that's being picked up in the audio. Wasn't supposed to rain today, but now we've got a thunderstorm. Lady Jane Grey is best suited for a long-running story, where you have time to get attached to her character before her execution. Again, Becoming Elizabeth showed what could have been, but it got cancelled. Their big flaw was focusing on Elizabeth, who was a particularly bland protagonist, while surrounded by much more compelling characters and performances. We can begin at the end of Henry VIII's reign and end with Elizabeth I's coronation. This would allow the inclusion of more forgotten Tudor figures, like Margaret Douglas and Jane's two sisters. Jane could have a relatable character arc in this setting, where she goes from a shy wallflower to a more confident individual. I'm pretty certain one could sell a Tudor drama as representing the lesser-known people in the court and how they witnessed the lives of Henry's wives and children, along with the plotting politicians. That'd be fun to watch, and Jane's execution would work well as a season finale before continuing into Bloody Mary's reign. Jane is a socially awkward character who takes a while to come out of her shell, but at the same time she has an inner curiosity and strength that doesn't buy into the traditions and etiquette of the court or the older religious practices. She doesn't want to put her faith in something without questioning why she should. It's always useful to have characters like that, especially directed at younger audiences. You need a mature mindset to tell this story, and I don't think stars would understand maturity if it smacked them in the face, what with all their sex scenes and F-bombs. Ugh, the rain's getting heavier. The big benefit of it raining for the past 3 weeks is that I haven't had to worry about watering my plants. I'm going to have so many tomatoes. They seem very interested in holding your attention by shocking and revolting you. All you get from watching these shows is just an annoyance headache. Yes, there are pieces of media that are so boring or annoying or badly written that they actually hurt. This is why it took me 6 months to watch The Serpent Queen. I haven't felt so ill from watching something since Iron Man 2. So overall, less stars, more Janes. Now I've come to the end of my Lady Jane Grey coverage, and I hope you've walked away somewhat more enlightened about her. Jane isn't a figure I've lionised or despised. I've always seen her as a casualty of the Tudors' politics, and a strong argument against monarchical systems. If the leader of a country were peacefully chosen through the consent of the governed, and not an arbitrary determination of those born within a single family, many lives would be spared.
I'm your king. Well, I didn't vote for you. You don't vote for kings.
Literal children would not be forced to take the highest office in the realm, whether they wanted it or not. Strange archbishops lying around in abbeys distributing crowns is no basis for a system of government. The lust for extreme power results in the suffering of many. Lady Jane Grey was one of those who suffered. She did not deserve it in the slightest, and it's a good thing that history has always seen her that way, even if she has been ignored sometimes. Jane Grey will always remain a cautionary tale as to what happens when power means more to a faction or an individual than compassion. There will always be a scapegoat, and the innocent will always suffer. Okay, let's do this outro nice and quick because there's pizza in the oven. That was the end of the Lady Jane Grey coverage, and it took a bit longer than I thought because real life got in the way for weeks at a time, but we got there, didn't we? So thank you guys for watching that, and if you guys liked the Lady Jane Grey coverage, if you stuck around for the whole thing and you haven't subscribed yet, please make sure you subscribe, because I do like the intake of subscribers. It's very useful to this channel. Speaking of which, I did hit 6,000 subscribers quite recently, but I haven't been able to do the special for it yet. It will come out in August because I got another video to get out by the end of the month, and I hope you're looking forward to that. So make sure you subscribe so you don't miss it. And of course, thank you to my patrons who have been supporting this channel all the way. These guys have been supporting my channel for about 2 years now, and you can support the channel too by signing up. Even the minimum contribution to my Patreon can get your name in the credits, just like these people here. And the highest level contributors, my King and Queen patrons, they get a special shout out in the credits. Thank you so much, Alison Cuff, Annalise Barnett, Jill My Nero, Larissa and Leslie Williams. You guys are amazing, and let's keep going with more historical subjects. I put out a poll recently on my Patreon where, for this once, all patrons got to choose, and I've waited as long as I can to make sure that everyone got their votes in, and of course it is too late to vote now, but there will be future polls to make that decision if you're a Duke and Duchess and King and Queen patron. So the next monarch we are focusing on this channel will be the first male subject to be focused on, and that is Richard III. See you later.